Nobody warned Gerald Kessler about the silence, not the cold, not the isolation, not the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after weeks on the ice. They trained him for all of that, but nobody, not a single person at the University of Michigan, not the expedition briefing officers, not Richard Byrd himself, nobody warned him that one afternoon in March 1929 he would stand on a frozen continent at the bottom of the world and hear something beneath his feet that would destroy the next 30 years of his life. He was 31, engaged to be married, 3 published papers before his 30th birthday. The kind of young scientist who still believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that if you looked at the world carefully enough, it would always make sense. He stopped believing that on March 14th, 1929. Here is what you need to understand about Antarctica before we go any further. It is not just cold. It is not just remote. It is the one place on this planet where the ice remembers. Every layer, every compressed crystal, every formation beneath the surface holds inside it something from a time before human beings existed. Scientists will tell you that. Geologists will tell you that. What they will not tell you, what nobody official has ever been willing to say out loud, is that in 1929, a survey team found something in that ice that did not belong to any natural time at all. Something that was put there. 6 men left the main Byrd expedition camp on the morning of March 12, 1929. Southeastern grid survey, routine work, the kind they had done a dozen times that season without incident. Measure, record, photograph, return. Kessler was leading the geological assessment. He had his instruments, his notebooks, his systematic mind that had never once failed him. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, that mind had gone very, very quiet. What he saw in the ice, what all 6 of them saw, was a formation that spread roughly 3 square kilometers beneath the surface, 40 meters down. And inside that formation, structures, not caves, not natural crystalline patterns, not anything that pressure or cold or geothermal activity produces anywhere on Earth. Structures, angular, deliberate, repeating, the kind of geometry that means something built it. Kessler wrote one line in his field journal that afternoon. Just one. It is not natural. It cannot be natural, and we all know it. Then he closed the journal. And as far as the official record of the United States government is concerned, those 3 days never happened. The gap sits right there in the National Archives if you know where to look. Not damaged, not incomplete, not the kind of missing page that happens when a document gets wet or a folder gets misfiled over 80 years. A clean gap. 3 days in late March 1929, precisely the days of the Southeastern Survey, where the 6 men simply do not appear in any expedition log. Their food rations are listed for those days, equipment allocations recorded, but the survey results, the photographs, the geological field report, gone. And here is the part that should make your skin crawl. Researchers have been asking about that gap for 50 years. Different researchers, different decades, different institutions, and every single time, the response they receive is the same, word for word, like it was drafted once, approved at some level nobody ever names, and handed down through the decades like a script. Records unavailable, materials likely lost during transport, no supplementary documentation available for consultation. 50 years, the same sentence. Archives do not work that way. People work that way. 6 weeks after the survey, the expedition's scientific director, Lawrence Gould, filed an internal report. We know this because 3 separate expedition members reference it in private letters written during that period. The report existed, it was filed, and it was sent to the Office of Naval Intelligence, the Secretary of the Interior, and a 3rd recipient identified in the routing records only by a departmental code. A code that has never been matched to any government office in any directory from that era. A recipient that officially does not exist. Lawrence Gould lived until 1995. 70 years of public life, lectures, memoirs, congressional testimony on Antarctic policy, interviews. He spoke freely and openly about everything from that expedition. The weather, the food, the historic flight over the South Pole, the loneliness of the ice at night. He never once mentioned that report. Not once. In 70 years, a man does not forget the most significant document he filed in the most significant season of his scientific career. A man who speaks for 7 decades about everything else and never touches one specific thing. That man is not forgetting. That man is choosing. Now let's talk about what happened to Kessler, because this is the part that stays with you. He came back from the Antarctic in the spring of 1929, and on paper his life continued normally. He returned to Michigan. He kept his position. He published a few more papers, careful, unremarkable work, on topics that had nothing to do with subglacial geology. He got married. He built a quiet, ordinary life in Ann Arbor. But the people who knew him before, they all say the same thing. He was different, not broken, not visibly haunted, just sealed, like something inside him had been shut down and locked from the inside. He stopped going to conferences, turned down 2 fellowships. That should have been the foundation of a serious academic career. Stopped talking about the Antarctic entirely. Not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention. Just stopped, the way you stop talking about something. When talking about it costs you something. You cannot afford to keep paying. At some point in the 1930s, no one knows exactly when, he packed every field journal, every photograph, every hand-drawn diagram from the expedition into a single box, sealed it, gave it to his brother, with instructions that were simple and absolute. Do not open this. While I am alive, not until I'm ready, not until I say so. While I am alive. He died in 1961. His brother waited 2 years. Then he opened the box. The contents were eventually dispersed through the estate. Most of it scattered, most of it lost. The way things get lost, when nobody with the right questions is watching closely enough. One field journal surfaced at a Michigan estate sale in 1987. The journal covering March 1929. A private buyer purchased it before any researcher could examine it properly. That buyer has never been named. The journal has never surfaced again. But not everything disappeared in time. In the late 1960s, a graduate student named Thomas Farwell was working on a doctoral thesis about the early bird expeditions. Somehow, through channels that were never fully documented, he gained access to the Kessler archive before it was dispersed. He sat with that box. He read the journals. He studied the photographs. He looked at the diagrams. Kessler had drawn with freezing hands in the middle of the Antarctic winter of 1929. Farwell never finished his thesis. He withdrew in 1971, went into private industry, gave one account of what he saw, one to a historian named Dr. Patricia Aldrich, who published it in a monograph in 1994 that was printed in a run of 200 copies and read by almost nobody. But in that account, Farwell described something he said he could not stop seeing for years afterward: the diagrams in Kessler's journal, the angular geometry, the scale, the repetition of shapes that had no business existing, 40 meters beneath a frozen continent. He told Aldrich, "You look at it long enough, and you stop arguing with yourself about what it is." Now here is where this story leaves 1929 and walks straight into the present. In 2004, 2012, and again in 2018, specific sections of the Antarctic interior were designated as restricted access zones under the international treaty framework that governs the continent. No press coverage, no public explanation, beyond a citation of standard management provisions, provisions that legal scholars have since noted do not actually require the specific restrictions that were made. Researchers who managed to partially reconstruct the coordinates of those restricted zones found something that has never been officially acknowledged. At least one zone corresponds, approximately but undeniably, and to the geographic coordinates of the Southeastern Survey Grid from March 1929. The same location, 95 years later, still Restricted. You can tell yourself this all has an explanation. You can tell yourself the formation was geological and unusual but natural, and the classification was precautionary. And Kessler was a sensitive man who carried things too deeply. And the archive gap was administrative failure, and the routing code was a clerical error, and Gould simply forgot, and Farwell simply burned out. And the restricted zones are simply procedural. You can tell yourself all of that, but then you have to explain why the language never changes. Why 50 years of separate researchers receive the same sentence? Why a man who spoke about everything for 7 decades never once said a single word about the one document that mattered most? Why the field journal was purchased at a private estate sale by a buyer who has never stepped forward? Why the coordinates still sit behind a treaty restriction today that nobody has explained, and nobody has challenged, and nobody in the international community has ever publicly questioned? Silence that organized is not silence. It is a decision made by people with enough reach to hold it in place across decades, across administrations, across the deaths of every man who was actually there. Gerald Kessler was 31 years old when he walked out onto the southeastern Antarctic grid in March 1929 with a notebook and a set of instruments and an absolute faith in the rational order of the physical world. He came back from that survey a man who would spend the next 30 years making himself smaller and quieter and less visible until the day he died, leaving behind a sealed box and an instruction, and that told you everything about the weight of what he carried. Do not open this while I'm alive. That is not a man protecting a geological curiosity. That is a man protecting something he was never supposed to have seen. And the ice is still there, 40 meters down, in a location that remains restricted under international treaty. Whatever Kessler's team mapped in 1929 is still sitting exactly where it was, unchanged, unexamined, unbothered by the decades of careful silence that have been built above it like another layer of ice. On top of the real one, Kessler is gone, Gould is gone, Farwell is gone, the journal is gone. What remains is the shape of what was taken away, the precise outline of a silence so carefully maintained for so long by so many that the silence itself has become the evidence, and the evidence has never been more clear.